Hello, my name is Anna Morgan, and for the past year, I have been researching gender inequities in ballet leadership for my MA in dance research with Rhombez School. Here's my research so far. My MA journey started with building a picture of the current state of gender inequity in ballet leadership and choreography. I delved into the data provided by the Dance Data Project, who investigate topics such as gender representation in different roles within ballet companies and the associated compensation. This review provided me with some clear qualitative data, proving we really do have an issue here that needs addressing. It's worth noting that in nearly all of what I'm about to show you, these stats are a significant improvement on those from the past 10 years. Things are certainly moving in the right direction, but my research aims to deduce whether this trend will continue and whether it is genuine and sustainable. So where are we at currently? There are 206 artistic directors of major ballet companies globally. Of these in 2024, 59 are women, that's 28.6%, and 147 are men, that's 71.4%. When women are leading as artistic directors, they're generally paid less than their male counterparts. In this report, which looked at the top 50 ballet companies in the US, and this is ranked by the number of dancers, women artistic directors are earning less than men each year. In 2019, they were earning 73 cents to the dollar. In 2020, 63 cents to the dollar. In 2021, 78 cents. And 2022, 83 cents. The Dance Data Project will be publishing more current data on compensation in September 2024. It's not just leadership in the role of artistic director that I'm interested in. I'm also keen to investigate who is choreographing work for these companies. In this report, they captured data from ballet companies in English-speaking countries worldwide. In the 23 to 24 season, these companies programmed a total of 250 works. Of these, men choreographed 72.4% of works, co-choreographers of mixed gender choreographed 4% of works, and less than a quarter, 23.6%, were choreographed by women. It's interesting to note that this includes new and existing work programmed. The vast majority of existing work is choreographed by men, but in reviewing this data further, it's encouraging to see that women are being better represented in choreography of new work. However, even this has its disparities, with men being more likely to be commissioned to create full-length works, whereas women are better represented in producing work for mixed bills. This could be interpreted that women are less likely to be trusted with the responsibility of a full-length ballet, and it's more likely that they're given a trial run with a single act piece. So now let's look at the data in the UK specifically. Of the top 10 ballet companies ranked by number of dancers, namely the Royal Ballet, English National Ballet, Birmingham Royal Ballet, Scottish Ballet, Northern Ballet, Ballet Ireland, Ballet Theatre UK, New English Ballet Theatre, Ballet Cymru and Ballet Black. Of these 10 companies, 3 artistic directors are women and 7 are men. It's worth noting that the top 5 companies have male artistic directors and women only come into the next 5. Those top 5 are significantly larger companies with 36 to 97 dancers, whereas the next 5 are much smaller with 7 to 20 dancers. But why is this happening? This data gave me a snapshot, but none of the rationale as to why this issue exists. To start unpacking those potential causes, the next stage involved as much reading as I could manage. It was important to gain a picture of the conversations and investigations that have already taken place on this topic before deciding where my own research would take me. I was particularly interested in work that took a feminist lens, because despite being perceived as a feminized activity, ballet exists as a patriarchal system, in that it is hierarchical, it takes a binary view on gender, it has allowed abuse to thrive, and it does not empower women to reach leadership roles. In my role as a ballet teacher to undergraduate students, and also in my role training entry-level dance teachers, I first wanted to examine how my own pedagogical approach exists within this system. I discovered that so much of what I had learned as a student and in my early years as a teacher aligned with this patriarchal structure. It struck me that until we reformed the way we teach ballet, we can never expect it to progress forwards to equality. I reflected upon the 6 principles of feminist pedagogy assembled by Webb, Allen and Walker in 2002. Having reviewed the current literature in the field, they decided these core principles were reforming the relationship between professor and student, empowerment, building community, privileging voice, respect for diversity of personal experience, and challenging traditional views. I began to explore my own pedagogy, realizing that the uniformity and coded nature of ballet movement did not need to be reflected in the teaching approach itself. Becky Dyer in 2009 explained that harm is not created in the repetitive performance of codified movement itself, but rather in the teaching framework it is presented within and the purposes of learning it. I discovered that adopting a feminist democratic pedagogical approach allows for much more than the acquisition of physical skills or simply creating a more pleasant learning environment. Rather, it creates a space where resilience and leadership skills can be cultivated. This felt like the first piece of the puzzle. We can't expect more equality in leadership until we first address the way we treat students in their training. From there, I started to look at the socio-cultural norms which prevail in ballet training and the professional industry. I looked at literature that focused solely within ballet culture, but also outside of it, to see whether a feminized yet patriarchal environment was unique to ballet. I discovered it was not. Sociologist Christine Williams studied 4 female-dominated professions in 1992: nursing, teaching, librarianship, and social work, to see if men in these industries were discriminated against. She discovered the interview data suggest that men do not face discrimination in these occupations. However, they do encounter prejudice from individuals outside their professions. In contrast to the experience of women who enter male-dominated professions, men generally encounter structural advantages in these occupations which tend to enhance their careers. Understanding that this phenomenon of men being disproportionately well treated in female-dominated industries was not unique to ballet, I went on to try and ascertain which additional factors may perpetuate this even further in ballet, and I discovered that there were 3 issues at particular stages of a ballet journey. The first issue begins in recreational ballet settings. As Susan Stimson explores in her journal article, The Hidden Curriculum of Gender in Dance Education, there's more to dance education than the learning of vocabulary. She suggests that there's a hidden curriculum whereby gender stereotypes of society at large are reinforced to girls within dance classes. Social norms and values are taught in the dance studio, but these aren't discussed or acknowledged because they're not written into the curriculum or schemes of work. They're just implicit. As dance classes are predominantly participated in by young girls, they're learning the rules of the game at their most impressionable time. She explains, most women begin dance training as little girls, usually between the ages of 3 and 8. Dance training teaches them to be silent and do as they're told, reinforcing cultural expectations for both young children and women. In contrast, most males in our society begin dance training later, at late adolescence or even early adulthood, when they've developed some sense of individual identity and voice. So, just on account of their timing of their entry into the world of ballet, we could deduce that boys will have missed out on much of the social conditioning that girls will have experienced. As Clegg Oaten and Alan Collinson say, girls may appear more compliant and have a less powerful energy because they've been institutionalized at an early age. But why are so many more girls participating than boys? This is because ballet is perceived as a feminized activity by society at large. Therefore, few boys participate in order to avoid being stereotyped as effeminate, homosexual, and not real men. Consequently, this can cause boys inside the ballet class to receive different, often favourable treatment in comparison to girls. Aware of the fact that outside of the studio, boys are likely being persecuted for their participation in ballet, teachers may overcompensate to create a more empowering and creative environment. As girls and boys move into pre-professional ballet training, it seems the disparity in their experiences continues to widen. In her thesis, Cultural, Political and Choreographic Developments of Feminism in Classical Ballet, Lydia Worth explores how boys might be treated differently to girls in training. Even when they're teenagers and in school, the boys get the scholarships, are feted, are courted. The boys are coddled, but the girls know that if they speak up or show individual personality, they'll be replaced. This is supported by Ashley Bowder, who is a principal for New York City Ballet, who explains that as a girl in ballet training, you have to be perfect, not only in class, but in attitude and decorum, and you have to fit in and be quiet. And the boys, in some cases, are allowed to just get away with murder, but it doesn't matter because they're just trying to keep them in the class and keep them dancing, because you need boys to partner the girls. This means more freedom outside of the studio too, and they're allowed to be creative, and they're allowed to try things, and girls are not. They can just do whatever they like as long as they keep showing up. If, despite their poor treatment outside of the studio, inside the studio, boys are treated as though they're special, allowed to develop their agency, character, and voice, whilst girls are being taught simply to suppress theirs, is it any wonder that boys eventually become men who feel empowered to lead and girls become women who don't? So now we move on to men and women's experience in professional ballet. The path to leadership in ballet may seem clearer for men than women. In relation to successful choreographers such as Justin Peck and Benjamin Millepied, Colette Kelly explains how. For these men, the path to choreographic success had a logic. It was clear, well lit, and supported by those in charge, such as Peter Martins. Kelly explores how the work of a female professional dancer itself does not breed leadership or creative qualities. A woman will start in the corps de ballet and therefore has to become an expert at becoming the same as everyone else. Kelly proposes that this is the opposite of creative exploration. Leadership involves independent thinking, and perhaps the conformity of the corps discourages this. DeFrank Cole and Nicholson explain, one can easily see that men are in alignment with their agentic gender role when they act as leaders. However, when women use the same agentic strategies, they are often not seen as being feminine and not acting according to their gender roles. Put another way, women have difficulty being seen as competent leaders, while also being perceived as appropriately nurturing or feminine. Specifically in ballet, could it be that the ethereal dancers are deemed not aggressive enough to lead? If a woman's worth in ballet is based on her ability to show qualities society might demand from women, submissiveness, modesty, conformity, etc., she will surely struggle to recondition herself to demonstrate contrasting qualities which may equip her for leadership. Even if she does manage this, these qualities may not be positively perceived by others when they are exhibited by a woman. This builds the second piece of the puzzle. If girls are socialized to be silent and submissive and made to feel replaceable, and this continues all the way through to their professional careers, how can we expect them to later become leaders? In addition to these issues, a further challenge came to light. How can a pedagogical approach and form of storytelling, which clings so tightly to the gender binary, also allow all genders to be empowered as creatives and leaders? I've often heard colleagues assert that we should just leave ballet the way it always has been when it comes to gender. But has ballet's relationship with gender always been just one way? I created a timeline to show key stages of ballet's relationship with gender. The full timeline is available to download on my research website, but I'll pull out a few of the key points. In the early development of ballet in the 16th and 17th centuries, it was danced solely by men. Where women were required for the plot, they were danced by men on travesti. And dancing ballet was seen as the height of masculinity. The ballerina wasn't introduced until the 18th century, at which point she rose to the forefront and men were banished from the stage. There was now prejudice against male dancers, although at this time it was more to do with class difference than today when it's rooted in societal homophobia. As the first ballets as we know them were created in the 19th century, Giselle, La Sylphide, etc., ballerinas were on a pedestal. However, depending on where you were in the world, the approach to gendered vocabulary was interpreted differently. For example, Bournonville expected men and women to dance the same steps and wasn't interested in the pedestal of the ballerina, which was generally being upheld by the French and the Russians. When Diaghilev's Ballet Russe came to the forefront in the early 20th century, Nijinsky and other men in the company represented a wide range of masculine presentations. They transcended gender conventions. As Balanchine created the School of American Ballet and the New York City Ballet, the patriarchal, hierarchical systems that we are now so familiar with became established. Misogyny was rife, and whilst Balanchine seemed to revere women, he also objectified and mistreated them. In the second half of the 20th century, ballet was seen as a feminized activity, with Western society's homophobic attitude mocking and demonizing boys taking part in what they perceived to be an activity for girls. In an attempt to legitimize dance for boys, it was often paralleled with sport to try and make it seem just as macho. Jennifer Fisher challenges this strategy, arguing it limits men's choices of how they can legitimately present masculinity. Some companies were successfully rejecting gender norms, with Les Ballets Trocadero being formed in 1974 and Matthew Bond's Swan Lake, which was first performed in 1995, becoming the longest-running full-length dance classic in the West End and on Broadway. Since the turn of the millennium, gender roles and sexuality are being explored more freely. For example, Royal Ballet principal character artist Kristen McNally creating Duet, a pas de deux for two women in 2019, and American Ballet Theatre creating Touché in 2020, their first all-male pas de deux, which explores the themes of male love. So we can see from this timeline that the way gender is constructed and perceived in relation to ballet is cyclical and ever-evolving. I believe we're at a pivotal time where we can again reform the way in which we approach gender in ballet. Clegg Oaten and Alan Collinson in 2017 suggested that in our current system of ballet training, the syllabus, along with practices that promote heteronormative masculinized ideals for boys in dance, may restrict both boys and girls in their expressions of multiple and more nuanced gender identities. They say that a move towards a pedagogy that is gender-free and empowering for all genders is required. To achieve this, changes need to be focused at the teacher training level to further encourage dance educators to be empowered and reflective practitioners who challenge restricted notions of masculinity and femininity. In other words, if we want dancers to be able to challenge the gender norms that may stop them from developing leadership qualities, we have first to challenge gender norms in the methods and content of how they're taught ballet in the first place. How can we expect all genders to gain the broad perspective required to be the effective leaders and creatives of the future when they're limited to only attempting certain vocabulary, roles, and qualities? This new development in my research interest aligned with certain shifts arising in my professional practice. In both the exam boards through which I'm a teacher member and also the setting in which I predominantly teach ballet to undergraduate dance and musical theatre students, a shift to a less binary approach has been evident. However, I could sense palpable resistance from many of my colleagues to this approach and wanted to investigate it further. I wanted to know what best practice might look like for my own teaching and the approach I recommend to new teachers. I sensed the views of those around me were extremely polarised and I wanted to find out more. I could see the advantages of a gender non-specific approach to ballet training, but did those who opposed it have a valid rationale for doing so, or was their resistance a veiled unwillingness to accept change? I set about investigating this topic with an aim to draw a conclusion on what I believe best practice would look like. I decided I wanted my research to take into consideration views from both ends of the scale on this topic, provide me with quantitative data from which to draw statistics, provide me with qualitative data from which to understand the nuances of the topic in more depth, allow me to draw a conclusion on what I think best practice could look like, and allow me to communicate this conclusion to both specialist and non-specialist audiences by presenting it in different formats, in essay form, longer form video, and short form social media videos and graphics. I selected 4 teachers, Richard, James, Stephen, and May, for interview based not only on their status as highly experienced teachers who had previously enjoyed professional careers in ballet companies, but also because I was aware in advance of the stance they took on this topic, with 2 feeling strongly that gender non-specific approach was optimal, and 2 who opposed or questioned this approach. Whilst I felt these 4 were well positioned to represent the wide range of views on this topic, it also felt I was limiting the depth of my discovery on account of all 4 being cisgender. I was then introduced to Ella. All of these participants have pseudonyms, a trans woman who had trained at 2 top UK ballet schools and danced in a major ballet company as a male dancer before transitioning in her late 20s. I was delighted with the depth that Ella brought to the debate and felt that her lived experience was unquestionably compelling as an argument for gender non-specific training. I adopted a semi-structured approach to the interviews, with questions provided in advance, whilst also allowing the conversation to flow freely. The interviews were fascinating. Richard and James advocated for a gender non-specific approach, explaining how important it was to them. The dancers felt able to display their authentic gender expression. May was sceptical about the idea, and Stephen was passionately against the idea. He argued that this was performative and would not equip dancers for the industry. This particular argument, was rebutted by Ella, who talked about her career as a male ballet dancer. She said the current training system only equips dancers for certain types of ballet, and particularly falls short when considering modern works. She described how her company did a lot of Killian, and the girls were not equipped to know how to safely lift and partner. She also described how the binary nature of ballet meant that she had to give up her ballet career to transition because she felt that ballet and her authentic gender identity were mutually exclusive. Once she had transitioned in her late 20s, it was not possible to be able to retrain as a female ballet dancer, but she did say that with a different pedagogical approach, she might have been able to navigate her career differently. In his interview, Stephen raised the argument that the cisgender majority are at a disadvantage as a result of gender non-specific training, and he claimed that Gen Z are not as happy as they may appear with this approach. I was intrigued by this concept because Gen Z are our future leaders and generally have a more progressive and fluid view of gender. So was it true that they secretly don't want to adopt this approach after all? I wanted to know whether Stephen was right or wrong on this one. So I decided to create a survey using a simple Google form to gather data from Gen Z dancers born from 1997 to 2012, who were currently in or previously had undertaken full-time training in which included ballet. Firstly, I gathered data on the person answering the survey, who, whilst anonymous, would provide information on their age, the time period in which their training took place, the type of institution they trained at, e.g. ballet school, musical theatre college, etc., and their gender identity. This way, I would be able to map any specific answers to someone's gender expression or training context. I then presented a series of statements around how we can approach gender in ballet training, asking participants whether they strongly agree, neither agree or disagree, or strongly disagree with each statement. Finally, I created a long-form text box with the question, is there anything else you'd like to share in relation to this topic? My investigation of this topic has made one thing clear. It's a complex issue without an easy and straightforward answer. Inevitably, whichever approach a school, conservatoire, or exam board choose to adopt will upset some and delight others. However, I do believe there is a solution which may be the best overall fit. So my recommendations based on everything I've learned in my research are as follows. Initially, i.e. in childhood training and the early stages of vocational or full-time training, all dancers learn the fundamentals of ballet technique with a gender non-specific approach. Personal artistry can be actively developed, and all dancers can be encouraged to access a diverse range of qualities, sharp, soft, strong, sensitive, and everything in between. Everyone is encouraged, as is safe and appropriate, to try all specialisms, which could be point, virtuoso, turns and jumps, traditional partnering, modern partnering, choreography, etc. Alongside experienced mentors, specialisms can be selected for further study, allowing dancers to reach expert level, i.e., the specialisms are based on skill acquisition as opposed to assigned on account of gender. I believe there are many benefits to this approach. It allows everyone to explore a range of qualities, artistic expressions, and vocabulary, rather than being limited to those of the ultra-masculine or the ultra-feminine. This, of course, serves trans, non-binary, or genderqueer dancers, but it also serves cisgender dancers. It gives dancers a broader understanding. Those who do not pursue careers in professional ballet are more equipped to be teachers, work in the arts in other capacities, or to be our audiences and donors of the future. Those who are able to pursue careers in professional ballet will provide companies with a plethora of unique, authentic, and artistic dancers who can offer a diverse range of specialisms. It can help level the playing field to empower more women, trans people, queer people, people of the global majority, neurodivergent people, disabled people, and other previously underrepresented groups to find status and success in ballet leadership and choreography. This approach is supported by the potential future leaders of Gen Z, 71.6% of whom said their preferred pedagogical approach would be general training to be gender non-specific, with options for additional classes specialising in traditionally male or traditionally female movements. This was as opposed to 10.3% who wanted gender-specific training where everybody would choose either the male or the female route, and 18.1% who wanted completely gender non-specific training. This felt like a third piece of the puzzle. How can a pedagogical approach and form of storytelling, which clings so tightly to binary gender norms, also allow all genders to be empowered as creatives and leaders? So, as I reach the end of year one, I'm drawing conclusions of what I have discovered in the past year. I believe there are 3 areas which are perpetuating the gender power and pay gap in ballet. Firstly, the lack of representation of women leaders. We need to see positive role models who are adopting feminist approaches and succeeding. The negative bias against leadership qualities being displayed by women, particularly women ballet dancers. All the time that we perceive a woman's assertiveness as bossy or bitchy, women will struggle to succeed in leadership. And all the time that our pedagogical approach and the narratives that we see on stage are steeped in a binary approach to gender, we will struggle to empower people of all genders to lead. So, I've presented the problems. My plan for year 2 is to find solutions. Firstly, I want to focus on women who have done it and find out how, particularly those who are playing it their own way and have not had to conform to the patriarchal leadership style in order to succeed. I want to create further opportunities to gather qualitative data, particularly in relation to how we perceive women in power within ballet. And my overall aim is to create a framework which could be implemented into schools. I envisage this being multifaceted to address the 3 areas above. So it would likely include changing the pedagogical approach to gender non-specific skill-based learning, creating opportunities for dancers of all genders to explore their creative and leadership potential, and addressing conscious and unconscious bias in those currently in teaching and leadership positions. So that's where I am now, and that's where I hope to go next year. Finally, here's my bibliography.